Good afternoon. We are going to be recording the presentation that we presented at the American Evaluation Association meeting on October 19th. We're going to be giving a demonstration of SSDforR, which is our software package that we built in R for analyzing single subject research data. Now, R, if you're not familiar with it, is an open source statistical programming language that is free, and we have built our package upon that. So things that we're going to be covering in this presentation is first of all, how do you get this package? Then we're going to be going over what SSDforR can do, and we'll be giving you a fairly detailed presentation. And then we'll be giving you a little bit more information about what we're doing to further develop our software. So all the software and everything that you need can be downloaded from our website, which is SSDanalysis.com. And what you'll need to download, first of all, is R, which is a free download from the Comprehensive R Archive Network, or CRAN. Now, once you download this, you won't be opening it. It will run in the background because we will be using RStudio as the graphical user interface. Now, you could go to these websites yourself, but we have links to it all off of our website, so you really only have to go to one place. And then once you have RStudio installed, we will show you how to download our package, which is SSDforR. I just wanted to give you a picture as to what sorts of things. This is a screenshot of SSDanalysis.com, and from in here you can see that we have a bunch of links from the top. We have a little bit, this is our home page, and if you scroll down you would see the links to Get R and RStudio. There's a little bit more if you are interested in our backgrounds, and we have a fairly extensive blog that we suggest, if you're interested in this type of research, that you refer to fairly frequently. We blog about single subject research designs in general, certainly about SSDforR, and our experiences of teaching this to master's level students. We have some scripts that you can use to have examples of each of the functions, and then we have a bunch of other resources that may be helpful to you, such as videos demonstrating some of the functions, and really to troubleshoot if you need help downloading some of this. We have graph examples, and we have screenshots of some of the output. Additionally, we have some supporting documents and additional help files that may be useful to you, and then we have some links and citations if you're going to be using the software either in practice evaluation or for your own research. And we have our contact information as well. So SSDforR is a data analytic tool that's used to analyze any type of single subject data over time. Now, typically, you may think of a single subject as an individual, which may be a client or a patient or a consumer, but it can also be a couple or a family, a group, such as like a therapeutic group, but it could also be a work group or a group of people that meets for any general purpose. It could be an organization or even a community. Anything that you could list as or consider a single group or a single subject, even if it includes more than one person, that you would be analyzing data for over some time period with repeated measures. Some of the things that SSDforR can do is it can build robust graphs in almost any kind of function that we have. So historically, single subject research data has been analyzed typically visually with lots of line graphs, and we follow that tradition and use graphs in almost, or other types of graphical output in almost any function, including functions that are not typically associated with visual output. Single subject research data is typically developed in phases, and the first phase is typically a baseline phase where there are repeated measures of some indication or more than one indication of what you intend to study over time. And that baseline phase, that's prior to any type of intervention, and then that baseline phase is used as a control or comparison for additional phases once some sort of intervention has been introduced. So you can get all types of descriptive statistics for each phase. And there are statistical and visual descriptive comparisons across phases, so you could compare a baseline phase to one or more intervention phases. And you can do that using all types of output. SPC charts, which are statistical process control charts, which interestingly are a combination of visual and statistical output at the same time, effect sizes, and we have lots of tests of type 1 error. Now, this is all sort of well and good to think about theoretically, but we'd like to spend some time walking you through a case example. So this is the scenario we'd like to present to you. And so this is an educational example. So Jenny is an elementary school student that was referred for social work services by her teacher. And during the evaluation, the social worker found that Jenny's behavior was inappropriate, which is why she was referred for services to begin with. She yelled during class, and she also cried excessively and called out of turn. So to better get a sense as to how bad the problem was, the social worker asked the teacher to take a tally of each of these problems on a daily basis over time. And as you can see here, we have an example of Jenny's baseline data. And we're showing you a picture of Excel here because this is how we have input Jenny's baseline data. But you could input this into any type of program that can write to or be saved as a .csv file. So that would be almost any spreadsheet file. Now there are ways to enter data directly into R, but we find this the most simple, especially for practitioners that are not so familiar with R itself. Now I just wanted to show you that over here across the top row we have a number of variables that we described prior to this. So here's the number of times that Jenny yelled during the baseline period, and this is the number of times she cried and the number of times she called out. And you'll notice that for each variable we have an associated phase variable, which we just put a P in front of the behavior variable to denote the phase variable. And in single subject research, A's typically denote a baseline phase. So this is all the times Jenny yelled during the baseline. So for instance, on the first day she yelled twice, and the second day she yelled twice, and the third day she yelled twice. But this was all prior to any intervention. And the same with the crying behavior and the calling out behavior. And you can see that this seventh column just has notes where you can note critical incidences that may be relevant to your work with the client. And you can see at the bottom of each of these we have an NA because, and we'll show you in the demonstration, that once you start intervening with the client, you'll just continue entering data here, but you would change this A to a B. And then if you change the intensity of that intervention, you could have a B1 phase, or if you return to baseline, you could have an A1 phase. But once you have this, you would just save it as a .csv file. Now I'm going to hand this over to Charlie, who will walk us through the analysis of Jenny's yelling behavior.
Okay, the first thing when he's going to do is open up R Studio and then load the package that we developed, SSDforR. You can see she has many packages, and now we're loading that package, and it's now available, and so are the functions. So the first thing is to show you the help files. So you can see there are many different functions, and there are help files for every single function that we have in the system, along with examples that you can run to see what it will give you visually and what the output would look like. Okay, so now the first function we're going to use is the get CSV file. We're going to bring in or translate into R the baseline data for Jenny. And notice there's a little bit of information that comes along with it, and Wendy is going to attach the vector SSD, which the spreadsheet has been written into, and she's clicking on it on the right side of the screen, and on the left side of the screen you can see the spreadsheet, and that's exactly how it looked in Excel. Okay, now the first thing to think about is we have this baseline data, and we want to really assess its adequacy before we go into doing an intervention. And because the baseline is very important in the sense that it's really a measure of the behavior prior to any intervention, and so that all interventions will be related back to the baseline. So let's begin by just doing descriptive statistics. As you can see, there's in the console a number of statistics like the N and the mean, the 10% trim mean, the median, standard deviation, the CV, and so on. And to the right is a bar graph, and you could see that there's one outlier that's way different, okay? And that could be troublesome for us. We'll see as we go on. Now Wendy is going to do a plot of the data, and she's going to put in X and Y labels and a title for the graph. Okay, now also there's a set of information about what you can add to the graph. We're going to add some text to it, and we're going to put an A in the middle to denote that it's baseline, and then we're going to put up a mean line to see what points are above and below the mean. And remember, the desire is to have the behavior go down. Okay. So we could see that there's a lot of variation where we have many points above and below the mean, and points that are we would consider atypical. So now Wendy is going to put the mean value on the line, which is 2.8. So you could annotate just about anything on the graph. Next, we're going to do some diagnostics, and we're going to test for one important assumption that the time points are independent from each other. So we're going to test for autocorrelation, which will quantify it by giving us a correlation or correlation coefficient. And we're going to use a form of it that will measure the lag1 autocorrelation that was developed by Hutima for small numbers of cases. And that's usually the situation in single subject design. So that here we see that we have a slight correlation, but it's not statistically significant. Usually I ignore significance in the sense that since we have small amounts of data, I really look at the magnitude of the RF2, and I really want to look for RF2s that are below 0.6. If it hits the 0.6 level, then I become more concerned, and then you have to move into some techniques to deal with autocorrelation, like transformations. So in this case, we have the advantage of assuming that it's not autocorrelated since it's small and non-significant. Next, we're going to test for another assumption, and that whether or not we have a trend. And so we're going to do a regression, and that's important, especially like if we want to do a t-test comparing phases. If there is a trend, the t-test would be inappropriate. It also would impact, as well as autocorrelation, impact effects, certain kinds of effect sizes. So here we have a moderate or now slight trend, a non-significant slope, and it's going up at a small rate. So we're going to assume that we don't have a trend. Okay. So now Wendy's going to detach SSD, and we're going to open up another file, and we're going to open up the file that contains our intervention data. And let's say that an intervention was introduced where the child was in a twice-weekly social skills group. And okay, so now you can see the spreadsheet, and now we have, after the NA, we have our interventions, which are denoted as B's, intervention values. Okay, so like we did in baseline, the first step is to do descriptive statistics. And Wendy, you'll have to correct that mistake.
See what I did. Oh, I don't think I attached it.
Okay. That's it. Wendy forgot to attach it. She forgot to follow her own instructions. Okay, so we could see that now we're looking at the same statistics, but it's broken down by phases. If you had more than 2 phases, that would also break it down by a third phase, a fourth phase, etc. And we have a graph to the right, and we could see that there's a drop in the median and also in the variation. So that's a good thing. It sort of is indicating that we're going in the right direction with our intervention. Now Wendy is going to do an A-B plot. And then she's going to put a line between the phases, between the A and B phase, to denote when the baseline ends and the intervention begins. And she's using the AB lines command, and now you can see the line, and she's accepting that line. Or she didn't accept it, she thought it was problematic, so she's going to do it again. She just selected no, and she'll do it again, and now she has a perfect line. We really don't want the points to be touching. And so we had other phases here. We could put lines between those phases. And now she's going to label each of the phases as A and B. A for baseline, B for intervention. And notice that she was able to get the previous command back in RStudio by using the up arrow. Now she's going to put on the means again, which will give us a good visual picture of the differences between the baseline and intervention. So there she is putting the line in, and she just clicked on where she wanted it to begin. After she put in the data, she's going to repeat it by doing the up arrow and just change A to B and putting it at the beginning of phase B. And so you can see that there's a drop and that there are at least three points that are below the mean in the intervention, but the mean itself is much lower than it was. It's 0.94, I think, something around 0.9, much lower than the baseline. And she's also going to label the lines. And after she does that, we're going to export it, show you how to export it into Word, so that if you needed to report that you would be able to write a nice report around it. So she's using the A/B text again, and she's able to use the up arrow to get back some previous commands. All right, now Wendy is going to export it after she accepts the input. And she's going to Word right now. And now it's in Word, and you'd be able to give a nice description of how well and how successful the intervention was. Now we're going to test for the same kinds of diagnostics that we used before. We're going to test for autocorrelation. And every phase that you use should be tested for autocorrelation. So she's doing it for the intervention phase. And once again, the autocorrelation is small and non-significant, so we're going to assume that the data is not autocorrelated. And that's a good thing. And now we're going to test for one more thing, and that is whether or not we have a trend. So we're running the regression again. And this time, we're going to do it simultaneously for A and B. So you'll see both simultaneously on the screen. We already did A, so now we'll see them side by side. Okay, so again, we don't really have a trend in the intervention phase, so that's good. So we could, for example, if you wanted to test type 1 error, we could do an A-B test. A t-test. We call it the A-B t-test. And see if there's a significant difference between phases. And the graph shows it very clearly. It's a big drop in the mean. We saw that in the first graph that we exported, and that there is a significant difference. So you get two forms of the t, one for equal variance is assumed, and one for unequal variance is assumed. Then it also does a test of equality. And so based on that, you would use, they're not equal variances, so you use the unequal variance version of the t-test. Okay, now let's look at this in a different way, and that is visually, and as really comparing using some criteria the degree of success in the baseline compared to the intervention. So we're going to begin by using what's called a one-band standard deviation graph. And you notice that the data is in the console to the left, and then we have three lines in the middle of the graph. We have the standard deviation, +1, the mean, and -1 standard deviation. And as you know, 68.4% of the scores are going to fall within that range. And so we're really defining a kind of a desired zone. We'd want it to be, since we want the behavior to go down, we'd want it to be below 1 standard deviation. So as you can see here, that there are 2 above the standard deviation in the intervention. We know we have 17 points, so we have 15 that are in the desired zone, and we only have 1 in the desired zone in the baseline. So we're going to, we could test that by the difference to see if the rate of success is greater in the intervention by doing a binomial test. And so you can see here that there is a statistically significant difference in the rate of success in the intervention compared to the baseline. Now we could use a much more severe criteria that is 2 standard deviations above the mean, and that would mean 95% of all the cases fall within that. So anything below 2 standard deviations would be at the 0.05 level. That's a pretty high threshold, actually. And in this case, we have 3, so that's fairly remarkable. And now we could do the same test. We have 0 in the baseline, and we have 3 in the intervention. Let's see if that's statistically significant. And indeed it is statistically significant, just like 1 standard deviation. Okay, let's do another we'll use a statistical graph called the XMR chart. It's an SPC chart, or a statistical process chart. And that uses a weighted form of the standard deviation and the mean. And so we'll see if we get, and we're going to use 2 standard deviations again, which is quite a difficult criteria to meet. And here again, we have our 3 points below the 2 standard deviations, so that we would, and Wendy just put up the legend, and so that we do have some remarkable change here. Okay, now another good way of looking at change that doesn't rely on type 1 error is to do effect size. And we're going to begin by doing using the ES effect size and also the D index. The difference between the ES and the D is simply how you use the standard deviation. You're subtracting the intervention minus the baseline, and then dividing by the standard just simply by the standard deviation of the baseline for the ES. But the D index, you're using a pooled version of the standard deviation. And probably if you had lots of variation, as we do here, in one phase and not as much in another, and they're very different, you probably want to use the pooled version, which would be the D index. But both of them are telling us the same thing if you look at our criteria, actually developed by Jacob Cohen. And we can see we have a moderate effect, which I think is a good way to refer to the amount of change. Now we're going to look at the percent exceeding the median. So we're going to start out by doing the PND below, since we want change to go down. And we're going to use the lowest value in the baseline as our criteria, only using, it's really a percent exceeding the lowest value in the baseline. And that may not be the right way to analyze this because we have a lot of variation. Let's see what happens when we do that. Do the PND. And you can see that we have an effect size that's fairly low, 0.18. Which really doesn't match with what we see. So we could use a different point, and that's the median, which would account for the variation in the baseline. So it's called PEM, and here we get the same result that we got using the ES and the D index. So there's kind of a comfort in the fact that all these different forms of effect size are kind of converging. Now we're going to use another type of effect size, which is an overlap method, and that's the improvement rate difference. The idea is to remove the minimum number of points from both phases to eliminate all overlap. So we're going to use a reference point to help us make that decision, 1.1. And so really, the points that overlap are, there's 1 point in the baseline and 2 points in the intervention. So we know that we have 17 points in intervention, so if we take out those 2, we have 15 remaining. And we're only taking 1 out of the baseline. and we get an effect size of 81.5, which again shows us a moderate degree of change. So I guess we would conclude then that our intervention is having a moderate impact on the child's behavior, decreasing it, and we probably want to continue on doing this. There's also the PAND that's available in SSD4R, which is another form of overlap, and actually these were developed by Parker, and actually we use them as a reference. If you look in our help files, you could go to the seminal article. Okay, Wendy has some closing comments for you.
Okay, so what we wanted to do was really give you a taste of what is in SSD4R, and obviously we could not cover all the functions, so we wanted to just give you sort of classifications of types of functions that were not covered in this demo but are available in SSD4R. So we have, we gave you a taste of some of the graphing functions, but we have lots of others. We have other standard deviation band graphs, and we have interquartile graphs, and we have a whole bunch of others, and they're all available. And again, when we went through the autocorrelation issue, luckily we didn't have any autocorrelation that we had to deal with Jenny's yelling. But if you had an issue of autocorrelation in any phase, you might try removing the autocorrelation by transforming your data using either differencing or moving averages. So we have functions to help you do that. And if that was successful in resolving the problem, you could create new files by appending your transformed data together. So to create new data files, and then you could use that for the remainder of your analysis. We have other tests of type 1 error. We have various chi-square tests and two different forms of the CDC, or the conservative dual criteria, and we can also analyze data using ANOVA. And we have a bunch of other SPC charts. These are just examples, but we have, I think, about 5 or 6 that, depending on the nature of your data, one or more of these might be appropriate for analysis. And we have other types of effect size functions, some more traditional, and again, some more dealing with non-overlapping data methods. We also have the ability to analyze group data. So you could look at outcomes related to members of groups, and then you could combine them, and then look at change over time for groups. And currently in this release of SSD4R, we do have 81 functions altogether. So there's some other development that we've got going on besides simply putting SSD4R on CRAN. And we wanted to share that with you because we enjoy having discussion with other people that are interested in doing this type of analysis. One thing is that Charlie and I both use SSD4R in teaching practice evaluation techniques to MSW students, and we use this both in person and in our online classes. I showed you our blog before, but refer back to that. We write fairly regularly on SSD4R, both specific topics that are of interest. We share some student work, and we write about all different types of things that may be of interest to those of you that are using this either for publication research or for evaluating your own practice. And we do some consultation services to agencies wishing to evaluate their own practice. And we have a book that's going to be published with Oxford in 2014, and that will be a reference book about how and when to use the various functions. So today we gave you some suggestions for the types of functions that would be appropriate for Jenny's yelling behavior, but we help guide you through the various functions based on the qualities of your data.
Also, we have an article that was published in
Research on Social Work Practice that describes SSD4R in use with social workers. Of course, we do conference presentations, which this was, and we're hoping to develop an online course to teach people to use these techniques. So if you're more interested in this, we have a Facebook page, which is called SSDforR, Software for Analyzing Single System Data, and where you can be followed on Twitter at SSDforR, and of course you can contact either one of us. And we thank you for joining us today.